all these plants consistently fell 50% or more under their target. And this one right here, this $6.7 billion project never even went online. This paints a pretty dark picture with only a few highlights, like these three, which are the only ones performing close to their stated capacity. So then, what makes these three plants different? One thing that all three have in common is that they're generally lower capacity than the others. So is scalability the issue for CCS projects? We'll get back to that later. First, a little food for thought. After 25 years and almost $80 billion invested globally, we only have 45 working carbon capture plants to show for it. And of those 45, only 3 are performing anywhere close to how they should. The rest are en route to failure. And 90% of the proposed carbon capture projects in the power sector never went live or were shut down prematurely. And there's something that we should probably touch on here. Many of these projects are financed by big oil. And you know as well as I do that oil companies don't like just losing billions of dollars each year on a technology that doesn't work. So what's their end game then? Let's look at some of these key problems with carbon capture. Let's start with the claimed theory that it's good for the planet and it'll make a difference. Well, that doesn't appear to be the case. Statista puts the share of annual CO2 emissions captured by CCS at just 0.12% in 2024. Imagine spending $12 billion on something and not being able to make even a dent of 1%. Okay, but maybe it'll pick up in the future. Well, again, the numbers say probably not. The latest report from the DNV paints the picture for the next 25 years. As things are going, we'll only be able to capture 6% of emissions by 2050 if we manage to lower global emissions from the current 41 billion tons per year by 50%. And that's a big if. If we don't, then carbon capture will only cover 3%. We're spending billions in upfront capital cost, trillions in operational cost to hardly make a dent in our carbon emissions. So how does this make any sense? It normally makes sense to follow the money. So maybe they're selling the carbon credits and making billions that way? No, that's not the case either. The most successful CCS plant in Europe spent on average $198 for every ton of captured carbon, twice the initial forecast of $105 per ton. Capturing it directly from a power plant is cheaper at $50 to $120 instead. However, carbon credits in Europe are only around 60 to 80 euros, about $70 to $93. And in the US, the 45Q tax credit gives $85 per ton, which is almost always lower than the cost. This makes most of these plants completely commercially and economically unviable, unless they do something with the carbon that adds value, which is exactly where the key lies. But before we get into that, I want to talk about my largest problem with carbon capture. It's kind of like this magical diet pill. If somebody on the TV came out and said, eat this and you'll lose weight, the problem with that is it'll build bad habits. You'll probably eat less healthy, maybe not even exercise, and hope that this miracle pill will take care of everything. This is kind of the economic climate equivalent of that. This tells people, oh, don't worry, I can just keep driving my gas car. We can keep using coal and natural gas power plants because we can just capture the carbon out of the air instead of investing actually in meaningful new technologies that are cleaner from the start. Going back to the diet example, everybody probably knows that there is no replacement for eating healthier, eating less, and exercise. Those are tried and true, age-old methods of being healthier. And whatever pill we come up with isn't going to replace that. And this also explains why it's oil companies that are investing in this, because if they could find a way to keep doing what they're doing, they'd want to. We've hinted at this already, but there's an even darker side to carbon capture. Most of the captured carbon is used to pump out more carbon in the form of oil through a technique called enhanced oil recovery, or EOR. EOR uses compressed carbon dioxide by injecting it into oil wells, pushing out the deepest crude that can't be easily extracted by traditional drilling. The result? You exchange CO2 for more carbon in the form of oil from the well. How much more? Well, 1 ton of compressed CO2 can extract 2.5 to 3 barrels of crude oil. At 0.43 tons of CO2 per barrel, this results in 1 to 1.18 tons of fresh CO2 emissions that are waiting to happen. Even if 100% of the CO2 stays in the well, that's a net 18% more CO2 in the atmosphere from every ton of carbon captured. While this makes sense for oil companies because now they have a product to sell, the value additive component we talked about earlier, it doesn't make sense from a carbon capture perspective.
This is an article about our Senator Cassidy.